Friends, I am so glad that you've joined me today. I am so excited to introduce you to a dear friend, Angela O'Neill. And I'm going to tell you about her. But first of all, let me tell you about these interviews. Every month we do an interview of someone that I know that I would love for you to get to know, to hear from. And I mean, they have so much wisdom to share with us. And part of one of our big values of what we do is that we want to bring voices from different generations, different backgrounds, different perspectives, because we believe that we can be lifelong learners. And the way to learn is to learn from one another. And so today I am super excited because I have my friend Angela O'Neill, who's going to teach us and talk to us about storytelling. Our stories and the stories of others, the importance of story. How do we tell our stories well? Why is it important? And all kinds of really fun stuff. So this will be a very informal conversation. I hope you really enjoy this time. Let me tell you about my friend Angela, because she is a rock star. Let me tell you, she is, you know, in the artist world, there's these like triple threats, right? They can sing, they can dance, they can act. Angela is one of those people. She can do so many things. She is so talented. She does so many things well. She's an amazing singer. She's a great actress. She's a storyteller. She's a writer. I mean, I can't say enough. And her husband, John, and Angela, dear friends of ours. Their dog, Molly, is the cutest thing ever. You got to follow her on Instagram, see all the fun Molly stories. Check her website out, learn more about her. She's a great speaker as well. You can see her on all the shows that she does. So there's so many great things to tell about Angela. I can't just stop. But I need to stop because I want you to meet Angela. Angela, welcome. Welcome to our time together.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for your passion for story and for the opportunity we have today to learn from you. So this is so cool. So cool.
I'm excited. Very excited.
Awesome. So where's Molly right now? Is she in another room?
She's in another room because she would have a story to tell too. And she's pretty vocal about it. So maybe we'll bring her towards the end when she can tell her story.
Right. Molly's very vocal. She'll tell us.
She's very vocal and very expressive. I don't know where she gets it.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Okay. So our conversation today is about story. And I want to start, first of all, to ask you, like, why is in your website, you talk about you're a storyteller. That's a passion of yours. And let's start by telling us a little bit about why story is so special and important to you.
Yeah. I think when I was initially making my website and trying to really define what is it that I feel passionate about, how can I say it? Because I'm passionate about arts and how arts can tell the good news of Jesus. And I'm passionate about people telling the good news of Jesus and the Bible and all those things. And I went, well, what is the word if I were to find it? And storyteller just seemed to be the thing that encompassed everything, telling a story, whether that's artistically or whether that's getting up and speaking my story or speaking a story from the Bible. Storyteller just seemed to be the right word for all of those things combined together.
I love that. I love that. Now, is your story something that you tell often?
Yeah. So I've told it. You know, it's funny. It's not something that I thought. I think that happens a lot of times where maybe we tell it. I've told it to students before and in small groups, but then suddenly it's almost like it gets refined and continues, and you never know where that journey takes you. And so last year I had the chance to tell my story artistically at a women's retreat. And that was one of the most intimate adventures with Jesus ever.
Now, wait, tell us, what does it mean to tell your story artistically? What is that?
Yeah. So years and years and years ago, I wrote a script, and it was from the perspective of my story. It was broken down, and I wrote it, and then I tucked it away and went, great, that's nice and safe in my closet or wherever it was, or on my computer for no one else to see. And then I felt a nudge in church where it was one of those moments when I went, oh my gosh, is this just for me, this message? And I just started crying, and I knew that I was supposed to take a step to go get involved with women's ministry. And so that stepped into, hey, do you want to tell your story at our women's retreat? And I went, sure. I have this script we could use. But then I went back and read it and I went, oh, if things have changed, that's like 10 years old. It still is part of my story, but there's a different part. There's different things now. And so I just then went into, well, maybe we can make this a spoken word piece. So spoken word is something that I've stepped into recently. And so it's my story, but told in the spoken word format. And so it was about a 4-month adventure to write it because I had this deadline of the women's retreat. And it honestly, I can say that it was just such a deep moment, even writing it, because there were moments I was working through my story with God and I felt like he was there. And there were moments where I felt, the enemy say, nope, your story's too small. So I actually write that in there. Or in the beginning, I say, this is the process. Mm-hmm. But it's spoken word. So it's rhythmic. It's kind of musical. It's a little bit of a dramatic interpretation of my story. Yeah. So it was a vulnerable moment, even practicing it. I practiced it for my husband before I went. And I just started crying and he says, do you want to share this with me? And I said, not really, but I feel like I should. And you should probably be the one who sees it first. Yeah. So
our spouses can be such an encouragement, right? As we're trying to learn how to tell our story, or, a good friend, can, right. It's good to run it by someone to kind of get their perspective. Because like you say, the enemy tries to say, well, your story doesn't matter, or it's, like you say, it's too small or it's too messy or it's ugly. Sometimes I know that's what I hear the enemy tell me about my story. It's like, your story's ugly. It's like, why would anybody want to hear that?
Right.
And so we need someone else to validate for us what the enemy tries to shut down, right?
Totally. And what ended up happening, and again, not planned at all. Someone was, one of my dear friends I was at church writing and she came by and said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm writing my story for the women's retreat. And I told her, like, in this moment, I'm feeling the enemy telling me it's too small. No one will care, all those things. And she said, first they prayed for me, this couple, it was a couple. And then she said, you need to tell that. And so I did. And like I said, I wrote it in the beginning. But the amazing thing that happened that I didn't plan was it ended up being almost like every time I rehearsed it, there was a prayer, because that beginning part proclaimed, no, I have victory in Jesus. And so that happened every time I practiced. So I was practicing it over and over and over again. And because it was artistic, it wasn't me getting up there and sharing. It was, no, this is very structured in how this looks. But there was a prayer every single time I went to practice. And I went, oh my gosh, that was like a prayer of protection every time.
I love that. So obviously telling your story, not just in an artistic way, but telling your story is important. Telling the stories of the Bible are important. And for our listeners who maybe have never told their story, how would you suggest they start? Or, why should they? Why should they tell their story? Why should we think about our story? Sometimes we go around life going, well, nobody cares about my life, right? Or maybe we think we want to tell it, but we're intimidated about how to do that.
Right. I think the beauty of all of our stories just goes to the body of Christ, in that we all have different stories. And even seen that in action, where in a small group, you hear someone tell a bit of their story and that touches someone else, or they step out in vulnerability and go, I didn't know that I wanted to share this, but then you see how it affected someone else going through the exact same thing. So when we share our stories, I think it's that tangible thing where people go, no, this is how God is currently working, or how he did work in my life and how I got through on the other side. Mm-hmm. And when we all tell our story, it's this collective big story that then just points people to God. And what I like to tell people is, my story may touch someone, but your story might touch someone else. And and all of that, when we're doing it for God and for his glory, and not just to tell our story just because, no, it's for God's glory, then it's amazing to see the impact, how it just trickles out. And so we all have a story, and the enemy really does want us to not think we have a story. And our stories are different. And I think sometimes we forget that our stories are not just the hard parts, but also those triumphant moments or those really joyous moments. There's so much in there.
I mean, but to tell those parts of the story, it's kind of hard not to tell them and sound like you're boasting or like, look my life, look what's happened in my life. I mean, I know when I tell my story and I tell the ugly parts, the messy parts, I mean, that's hard. It's always hard to do that. But when I'm done with that, I feel guilty telling the other side. I feel, I quite often, I find myself telling a long portion of what went wrong, because then it feels like, I'm not being prideful. But then when I get to that part where I look what God has done, then I feel like I didn't deserve that. I don't deserve any of his grace. So, and all his generosity that he's given me, I don't deserve it. So I don't even like to tell it because it feels like I'm showing off or something, What would you say about that?
I would say, I think it's okay for us to humbly realize we don't deserve it. We don't deserve his grace, but he's given it to us. And just this past year, even within COVID, so I teach high schoolers how to speak publicly, and their last assignment is, why do you believe what you believe? And basically it is, what is your story and why? And it causes them to really wrestle. And during COVID, we had to do it differently than we've ever done it before. And I tried to take just biblical examples of storytelling and share that with them. And one of the great examples, I love the example of Paul in the Bible, because Paul's story is really messy. And that helps us a lot, I think, to go, wow, Paul's story, he says it, I was the worst of the worst, But then when you watch, so I just started analyzing how because he's such a great speaker, how did he do it? And he would go into, I'm the worst of the worst, but always turn it back to the grace of God. And just following that example of his dynamics and his impact, and how he went and, would talk about being the worst of the worst, but real quickly go, but because of God, I am now this.
Yeah. And
so I think we can the awesome part about the Bible is we can look to the Bible and go, no, that it's okay. It's okay when it's for his glory, and when we're telling it, we're almost, we're pointing it back to him and what he did. And so
that's usually what gets me out of my head when I remind myself I'm at that portion of my storytelling. I'm actually not telling my story anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm now telling God's story, what he's done. And that helps me a lot. So it's really good. And now what would you say, because you teach this, by the way, thank you. Thank you for being a teacher, because I just want to celebrate you for a moment, because you're special, and it's so hard right now to teach through the COVID situation, obviously through Zoom or online. And that's a real big challenge for you and for the students. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
But what would you say when you teach your students, like, what makes a good story? How do you describe that?
Well, in this specifically, it's a fundamental public speaking course. So we go through just your basics in this moment. So we wrestle, or I pose questions for them to wrestle with, even just trying to find out what are the moments in your life. And I think a good story has a lot to it, or it is, that struggle. Whenever we watch a movie, we enjoy seeing the struggle and then the triumph at the end, or there's some form of transformation that happens, or maybe it's that miraculous thing where you go, oh my goodness, I just have to tell you this because there's no other explanation other than this miracle that happened. or the really joyous ones. We like comedies, we like to laugh. And we are all natural storytellers. That's what I try to tell my students is we all know if you're going to tell a joke, you know how to tell a joke so that people, oh, there's Molly. I don't know if you heard that.
I knew she was going to make her appearance.
She was. We all know what that, we know how to tell it. We know how to tell a story. When I'm excited about something, I remember when I told people I was engaged and I was so excited, and you know how to tell it from beginning, middle to end. And a good story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so I think it's naturally in us. We all tell it differently. I'm a theatrical person. Also, I'm Italian, so we use our hands all the time. So when I tell a story, that's what's going on. But we all are natural storytellers. So, and we all know what kind of stories we like to hear, I think, to some extent.
Yes. Now, speaking of beginning, middle, and end, sometimes we are telling a story that's in progress, right? We're still in the middle of it. Yeah. And those stories matter too. Like there's no, maybe there's a beginning and obviously a middle, but there's no like finished product to it. And, so maybe the end is the hope for what might happen next, right? Right. But there's a vulnerability when we share our stories, especially when they're not like tidied up all pretty, when we're still maybe in the messy, but we're being bold enough to tell the story. And it's so easy for people to judge you when you're in the middle, because it's like right away they try to finish the story for you in their minds. And especially if it's a messy story, they might lead you to shame or a sense of like, well, you're dumb or whatever might come in their minds. At least I make up stuff in my head about what people might be thinking, but you feel it when people respond. If they don't respond audibly, they respond sometimes just with their body language or such. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I would even say that I'm a little bit in that, we're all in progress. Yeah. And I like the lifelong learning idea that we're never going to arrive until we get to heaven. That's when we've arrived. And so everything is still in progress, which is wonderful. And honestly, I think the journey that I've been on even the past year or so has been an in progress journey. And that was one of the things I was afraid of was, gosh, I feel like this is the time for this part of the story. This is the time that God is saying, this is the moment, step out in faith, do these things. And the things I was thinking was I don't know what the end is. How do I do that when I don't know what the end is? And what are people going to think? Because I feel like this is stepping out and what are people going to think? And those are, those can get in the way of God just saying, no, go. And he was so gracious to confirm along the way in my story. But I think those moments are really beautiful too. And even kind of feeling like now is one of those moments for me. The thing that I feel like God has been placing on my heart just through reading and through study and through other people is this idea of just obedience in the now and being obedient to that thing that's right in front of me. And I could get so caught up in what that end is. What is the pretty bow at the end? And we know what it looks like. And I could lose myself thinking about that, but to just kind of enjoy the journey of the in progress and, okay, God, this is what's in front of me right now in my story, in our story, really. And I'm going to be obedient there and to see how he works. And in that in progress, he's walking there with us the whole time. And it's been it's a scary journey because we like to know the end, but it's been a really beautiful journey. And the word obedience has been kind of the word over the past maybe 6 months that has been very constant in my life, and a theme that I feel like God and I are working through together in a really pretty and beautiful way. So I don't know if that really answers that fully, but I think that in progress, there's so much in there. There's a lot of the meat of the story happens in progress.
In the middle, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I personally, I love the stories. They frustrate me, but I also love them. The stories that don't have that happy ending,
Mm-hmm.
because it kind of puts me in the center with where that story is. You know, those movies that end in a way that you're like, well, what happened? What's going to happen next? Like, wait, why did you stop here?
Right.
And it's very, very frustrating. But at the same time, you're forced to be in the middle with that
Right.
person. You get to be in the unknown. And so often we seek those stories that are finished because we want that finished product for ourselves. But in so doing, we undermine the beauty of the now, as you're saying, the beauty of the process, which we are all in that process. Nobody's a finished product. So love that. Now, here's a big one.
Okay.
There are parts of our stories that should be kept private. There are things that we should not share because they hurt others, they hurt ourselves. People may misuse and hurt us through it, right? I mean, sometimes we tell part of our stories and people will then shame us because we share them. There's a vulnerability that comes when we expose something about ourselves. Maybe an addiction, or it might be, an affair that we've had, or it might be just a bad habit or a way of being. Sometimes a huge mistake we've made, and or maybe someone has hurt us. I mean, there's a lot of parts of our story for a variety of reasons that should be kept private, for also a variety of reasons. So anyway, tell us about that. Like, how do you decide what should stay private? What do you share? Yeah.
Yeah, it is a big one. Because, sometimes those moments, I think I don't know. And I'll just go in a personal, I don't know if there's always one answer for that. There's knowing, is telling this part going to distract from the end goal, which is pointing people to Jesus and what he's done. So if I give every single detail right now, is it going to point more just towards the things I've done negatively, or is it going to seem like I'm putting someone down? And that's not what I want to do in it either. So trying to keep, this is what I do. I try to always keep the goal. Okay, this points there. And I think there's ways even to know, my inner circle, they're going to know all the nitty gritty because that's my inner circle, and they get to know that. And sometimes there's the ability to share, okay, I need to share this part, but I don't necessarily need to share every single nitty gritty detail, because it will distract. And that's all people are going to walk away with is, let me tell you the things that she did, or whatever it might be. So understanding just when it's the right time and how much is good. So when I told my story at the women's retreat, that was a big wrestle. And honestly, it was initially, I think it was 15 pages long, which would have been a half an hour spoken word piece. And that's a lot.
You memorize that, right?
Yeah, that's a lot. And so, but it had a lot of detail in it. And then I worked through, and that's great. And I think it was good for me to even do that exercise of what this looks like. And then I worked through and went, I never want someone to say, oh, that's that person she's talking about that hurt her. I don't really want that, because I don't want that to be the focus. I have to work through that, but I don't want them to focus on that. I want them to focus on the part, how God was with me in the journey, in the good, in the really messy parts. When I felt shame, he was still there because his grace and love. And so it took going down to making that, I think, 6 pages from 15 to 6. So it still was the same story. It just, I think I tried to weed out any moment it wasn't really pointing to Jesus, or it was maybe too much and I didn't need that. That wasn't what was needed. So I think there's discernment and knowing and really trying to, when I tell my story and when I write my story for a different event, or if I'm going to go speak my story, I really try to pray through, God, what is it that you want me to tell for this exact audience? Is it this part? Because even at that, what I've shared before is not all of it. We'd be here all day. We'd be here forever. But what is it exactly in this moment? Do they need to hear this part, or do they need to hear this part? And I think when we try as best as we can to let God lead with what needs to be told, then that's good. And our focus, we can almost be confident in, okay, I really feel that I have been obedient in everything that has been presented, because I've made God the process.
Yeah, right. He
almost
gets
like
to decide how the story gets told. And and that kind of brings up a point, and that is when we tell our stories, while it's beautiful to tell our stories, and the stories themselves have their own beauty, we're telling our stories for a purpose. Mm-hmm. I think of, for example, the Gospels. Each one of the Gospels is telling the story of Jesus, but each writer is trying to write it from a very specific perspective and goal. Yes. Matthew is trying to show the Jewish nation, the people, Israel, this is the Messiah you've been waiting for. So he tells a story in such a way that they know that, John is trying to show the deity of Jesus. And so he's constantly talking in terms to make that clear. So same story, they're telling the story of Jesus. Some of the stories, correlate to one another, but they're told in such a way that you can actually, if you look for it, you see that the writer had an intention in the way the story was being told, which I think that's the same thing when we tell our stories, right? We're telling our stories, like you say, with the audience in mind. Who's listening? Mm-hmm. What is it that they need from my story that I'm trying to share? Because at the end of the day, we're sharing our stories, not just for our healing, but also for the benefit of others. It's not just for them, and it's not just for us. And keeping that in mind is so important. And yes, we might be misunderstood, and people, you could have a large room of people, right, that are, some are getting the goal that you had in mind, and some will not. Some will hear it differently. Some will be affected by it differently, and you have no control over that. You have to, like you say, listen to the Lord, be obedient to his call and to what he thinks you should share for that moment, right?
Right. And I think that it's so key, because just like you said, not everybody, someone might get mad at something or think, wow, why is she up there? Because, and it's so sad. And that's where, as best as we can, being prayerful and obedient, in the end, it's that, okay, I have tried to not make this about me, but about God. And we have wrestled through this together. And so I feel that I am being obedient to what he's calling me to do in this moment. So when that person is angry at me, then at least I can go, okay, I can't change that. I was obedient to what God called me to do in this moment. And I think we can, I could keep going for forever and ever, but we also in the Gospels have such the great example of looking at Jesus as a storyteller and how he looked at audiences and went, okay, and his parables, and he told these beautiful stories that people could understand. And I love that we can give the Sunday school answer of Jesus. We can look at how he does it and how he reads the audience and says things in ways that could be really hard concepts, but people can hear. Or even, his tougher moments for some of the people who are questioning him.
Challenges. And he challenged others. So let me ask you this. Sometimes when we're telling our story, we are obviously involving people in our lives. Our stories are never devoid, right, of the relationships that we have and the people in our lives. And sometimes our story involves someone. And do you ask that person first before you talk about the story and include them? Obviously, depending on how many people are intimately involved in the story you're telling, or how close they are to the situation. How do you go about like checking in with those people? Do you check ahead of time? Do you not?
Yeah, I would say most of the time when I bring up a person, they either probably already know what's happening because we've talked about what's about to happen. But again, and I look at other examples of how other speakers have done this, and so learning from other people is so great, and having those role models, not to be their voice but to learn how they've done it. And I think some of the great the speakers that I look to, so I would consider them great, a lot of times they may tell a story, but you have no idea, especially if it's trickier. You might not know who that person is. You're just hearing the story, but they don't give the detail of this is their name and this is, so I think there's that where, and
you
when
can protect. You can protect. There's times where you can tell the story in a way to protect. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I know for myself, when I've told my story, there's a limited ability for me to protect, because it's hard to tell my story without it being very clear. Certain people were specifically affected by it or were in the story. I say, for example, if you're talking about having an affair, right away, you know that the spouse or the other spouse was affected. It's like, boom, without even saying anything else, just using that term, it automatically connects people to your story. And now all of a sudden they're in the story, or your children are in the story, whether you mention them or not.
Right.
And so, that could create all kinds of challenges. It has for me on, their reaction to you sharing the story. And how do you prepare yourself for their response? I sometimes have been prepared. Sometimes I've been taken by surprise at the response. And sometimes, and I'll before you answer that question, sometimes I have people in the audience who are like, wow, you're so brave and so bold, and you told your story in such a way. I want to tell my story too. And I always tell people, the amount that I share, like you say, I've wrestled with the Lord way before I open my mouth. I often will ask, is it really necessary for me to share this? Is it really necessary, God? Is there another way? Like Jesus on, is there another way? Because I feel like I'm just so raw every time I do it, and when I feel like God's saying, no, this is what you got to do, I do. I'm obedient. That doesn't mean God's calling everybody to be that raw, that open about their story. So anyway, I know I just threw two different things at you. How you prepare, how about the response, and how do you decide what, make sure that when you're following someone that you admire the way they told the story, you don't just take that as a formula for yourself, because you might put yourself in a really difficult place. Definitely.
And I think, like you said, if you're going to share a part, it probably is good for people to know, hey, I'm sharing this. What are your feelings? What are your thoughts? God and I have wrestled. So I just want you to know I'm coming to you now, and we've gotten to this spot, but I guess, it never hurts, especially you don't want people to be surprised. Go, why am I getting this? Why am I having people respond this way? Or, so it doesn't hurt to tell people, and hopefully they wrestle with God too and come to that conclusion that, hey, that's okay. That's okay. I forget the other part that you said. What was the other part?
Well, the other part is when you're learning from someone who's telling a story in a certain way, and you feel like, oh, okay, that's how I just have to go tell my story to that level of detail, etc. Right. I guess I'm just sharing, like, I guess there's a warning, right? I always feel a sense of like, oh, take that to the Lord. Don't just tell your story the same way. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, definitely. So when I teach this in school, I try to emphasize to students, you have your voice, and I don't want you to be my voice. I'm not grading you because in school you have a grade, and I hate grading on this. I go, you all get an A. You did it. You
Yeah, yeah, that's hard, right? It's so subjective. How do you bring
Yeah,
the story?
it's hard. I just make sure that they hit the points from a public speaking standpoint, because we're trying to just build on that. That's that goal with that class. But overall, in the beginning of class, one of the first days is always, I am not asking you to be me. And I don't want you to be me. You can learn, and you can learn things, and I can pull and go, wow, that was so effective how they did that. I like how they did that. But I'm not going to be that person, because God's given me my own voice and my own way. And if we all looked the same, it would be so boring. and that's the beauty of, we have a creative God that has made us all so different. But to know that it's good to learn from people. It's good to learn to see and observe and pull, but do not make your voice someone else's. My goal as a public speaking teacher is to help facilitate them to find their voice and to use their voice in the most effective way possible.
I love that. I love that. Now, do you have sort of like an accountability partner or people around you that can help you discern if you've made the story too much about you, or if there's an agenda coming through, because, hey, we're all broken, right? I mean, the reality is we might have this sense that I'm telling the story because there's a greater good. It's going to help others, or God's calling me to do this. And, I'm all for listening to the Lord and following his leading, but we don't always get it right. We don't, we might think, I'm hearing this from God, and it takes a lot of discernment to be clear that we're actually hearing God's voice versus our own, because that's a hard thing to discern sometimes. Do you have people around you to help you kind of check, not just be around the few that are like, Angela, we love you, just go girl, you're perfect, right. Don't change a thing. I mean, do you have people around you that are like, Angela, maybe this part of the story, are you sure that's essential, or what's behind that? Or I don't even know how a good accountability partner does that. But anyway, yeah. I just rambled on. You know what I'm saying?
I do. I think I have not just an accountability partner, but I have those trusted people in my life that I know will tell me the truth, and they'll say, you've totally missed the mark. And I go, oh, okay.
Hard to hear that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It really is. In fact, I spoke before COVID hit. I spoke at a MOPS event, and I'm not a mom yet. And so there was part of me that was like, I don't know if I know how to do this. Do I have anything that I can share? And it just was telling my story for God's glory. And that was the goal of that. And then encouraging others to tell their story, this conversation we're having right now. But within that, I was wrestling with a few things, because I had gained some insight on the audience, and I just wrestled with, how do I think this is what I'm supposed to share, but I'm not sure in this moment. And I was able to bring that to several trusted people, and even to my small group at the time. And it was so amazing to hear how everyone spoke into it and pretty much had a really similar answer. So these several trusted people that are then confirming, go this way, it's important, or whatever it may be. And it's good to know who those trusted people are. Without a shadow of a doubt that they love you. Yeah. They're not just going to tear you down, because that's in the vulnerability of it. To just be torn down can be detrimental, but they will tell you the truth, and they'll say, I don't understand what's happening. So the first time I shared my spoken word, I shared the full version with John when it was done and completed, but my artistic partner, I shared it with that person, because I wanted to know, does it make sense? You're going to look at it from, me, where my heart's trying to go, because this is for God. This isn't, and I don't want it to all be about me. I want it to be about God. And you're going to know artistically if it works and is effective. And it was a cry fest. But
you got some truth told.
Yeah. And my partner, my artistic, who I work with, we write things together, we direct together, we know how each other think and can know the intention, even if it's not right, and are able to correct. It was important to have that be heard, and then he was encouraging, which was amazing. But I knew also that it would be truth no matter what. Awesome. There would never be a lack of truth. And so I think, yes, having someone holding you accountable and to run things by and to say, does this make sense? Am I all over the place? Because there's a lot of stories going on.
Yeah, that's right. And our stories are very complex. So it's very easy for us to get bogged down in some of those skills. I'm going to switch us over because I have so many questions for you in such limited time. And so switch us over to how technology has changed the way we tell stories. And I specifically wanted to hear from you, like, how our generation tells stories, how your generation tells stories, and how the next generation is telling stories, and how it evolves and changes, and technology has affected it as well. What are your thoughts on that?
I think technology has allowed everyone the ability to reach a large audience, or an unknown audience. Maybe I should say that, maybe not large, but with social media and some of the things I don't fully understand, like TikTok. I don't really get it yet, but
you don't know how to dance and pause.
I know how to dance, but I don't know. Sometimes I see people just dancing randomly and I go, what's happening? But I also love musicals. So part of me thinks this is my dream coming true. Okay. But I think that it allows us to have a space to tell our story, whether, and it's understanding how we're doing it and how to do it well and how to do it effectively, because it's just not hard to make a video and post it, and it's there.
Which brings us to that point we were just talking about. So one of the challenges of technology, like you say, we can reach so many more people very, very quickly, and we can put it out there very quickly before we have really good time to discern or go through all the processes we just talked about.
Right.
So there's a sense where our story can be spilled out. In a moment, you might feel this sort of, I'm going to share this, and you impulsively, or even thinking through, but doing it so quickly, you don't have that time for discernment. You put something out there, and you just can't take that stuff back, right? The stories that we tell now through technology live out there for good. Even if we delete them. I mean, I was, on Twitter, I see tweets where I go, so-and-so just posted this and they deleted it. Now it's gone, but it's being talked about because it was there enough time for people to capture it and then talk about it for a long term. So we can't escape. Once we put it out there, we can't escape it. And so for the next generation, that could do one of two things. It can make people a little more shy about telling their story because they're afraid of what could happen. Or it can make us somewhat cavalier about telling our stories in such a way that we start bringing harm to ourselves and to each other, right? Unintentionally or maybe intentionally.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's a lesson, even as I work with high schoolers, to really instill in them is it's there and it's there forever. And so, what you put out there, for them, your college could go back and look, your job interview, your future spouse, any of these. So just know what you're putting out there, because a little tweet, we're telling a story just with little things, it doesn't even have to be a big video.
Yes, that's right.
So it's important to be careful, because words can hurt and words can tear down. And I think I look at, you know, I look at that even just, it's so easy, I think, to post something and then it has just massive ramifications.
And people will judge. I mean, I know, I have friends who have shared things very vulnerably and honestly, and, you know, especially if you know, this is a public figure who feels like I don't get to keep my story to myself because, you know, my role is such that it affects others. So I need to be honest about my story. But then, man, it gets turned on them so badly. You know, some people are like, yay, thank you for being honest. That's right, you should. Other people are like, no, you're a leader, you shouldn't be doing this. I mean, you just get, you're always in front of so many people. Even if you're not a big celebrity, the reality is, you know, what is the average? Like everyone has 150 or 200 followers. I may be wrong about the math, but that's a pretty big audience already, right? Of people who could judge you in one way or the other, not to mention that the material's out there. So not to scare us, but it does show that I think the next generation storytelling, because of this medium, may be affected by that. No different than as you see in Instagram. You know, Instagram is known as this place where everything's polished and such. And we're hungering for realness. It's risky to be transparent and vulnerable. You know, it doesn't always work out the way we want it to, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And that's where you know, and even trying to have discernment in, are these words, I can't tell you how many times I've written and then, okay, wait, let's go back. You know, and not to be fake about it, but just to, am I getting the intention that is meant?
Yeah.
Let me make sure my words are that it's that intention and that I haven't gotten in the way somewhere in the process. I don't know. It's tricky. Gosh, it's a tricky world. I can't even imagine, even for the younger generation, it's hard.
But that all said, stories matter, right?
They do.
Telling stories matter. We, like you say, we are storytellers. It's probably the most fundamental thing. I mean, that we share with one another is our stories with one another. And so, we got to keep doing, we have to keep trying to figure out a way to do it, right?
We do. Yep.
Yeah. What word of encouragement would you leave us with as we close this time?
I just think, you know, Psalm 139 is where I kind of look at it as like a life chapter and it's part of my story if we were to go in detail, but how we were all created and we are here and we were created by the master artist. As an artist, I love to think of God as so artistic and we are his masterpiece.
Amen.
And the enemy does not want us to believe that, but we are here. And so if you have breath, you are here for a purpose, on purpose. You're here. So to know that the God of the universe loves each and every one of us. And Psalm 139 goes into us being formed, and we are each formed so uniquely. And that's the beauty of having such an artistic God, is that we each are different. And I can't tell you how many times in those differences, when you hear someone, when I've heard different people tell their story and I go, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. And so it's scary, but it's an important thing. And I think if we all tell our stories with the intention for God's glory, not because I want to be on a platform, not because it's about me, but it's about God, just the beauty that can happen. And we see it in the Bible. We see a lot of people telling their story in the Bible, and we can continue sharing how the Bible and how Jesus right now in this time is real and present and working in our lives. So I encourage you.
Writing a story, right?
Yep.
Continuing to form and write a story. I love that. Yeah. Angela, you've been so generous with your time. I'm so grateful for this time. tell us, as before we close,
Yeah.
what are you up to? How can we support you? I want
Yeah.
to give a big shout out to whatever it is that you're doing, that we can follow along and be on your journey. So tell me what you're up to.
Oh, well, I love that. So I am on this journey of feeling like it's time to tell stories, and some of those are artistic and writing and performance based. I grew up doing theater, and so I love how a story in that form can tell a big story in a different way. So this year has been a little bit of writing. Writing stories with church. We have our big picture show at Mariners Church that is going, and so being able to write and perform with that has been great. There's potential for some other theatrically based stories for God's glory that are in the works for this year. So I am very excited about that. I think that theater and film and in an artistic way has and art in general, music, goodness, it has the ability to share a gospel message in this way where people go, whoa, whoa, whoa. I would have never thought of it like that. Or maybe open a door for someone who might not want to go to a church service, but would go see a production or something. So
the big picture show, just for clarity, for those who are not Mariners folks,
yes,
you're actually writing the script for these and then acting in them. And these are for high school students?
So the big picture show is, I'm part of a writing team, which is amazing to work in community with people. And it is a kids sitcom. So that got based out of a need in COVID. Hey, we still need to reach kids. So it's for kids. I would say your elementary aged kids, but it's pretty fun. So
and it's on YouTube, right?
It is.
On the Mariners website or the Mariners. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Both.
So on the Mariners channel, actually. So you can check Angela out and her glorious acting. Mm-hmm. Or actually, I noticed that you put some on your website as well.
Mm-hmm. Just to
Angela-O'Neill. There's my shout out for my sweet friend. And like I said, follow her on Instagram and social media. Check out her sweet doggie, Molly. And once in a while, her handsome husband, John, who we love very much. So thanks again, Angela. Once we share this live, I'm thinking people may have more questions and such. Yeah. So, we'll keep an eye out for that and send you the questions, or obviously we hope to see those questions on social media as well. And so we can continue this journey, right, of learning how to tell our stories well, and watching you as you teach others and model for us how to tell our stories. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you. And thank you all for joining us for this interview. This is such an awesome time that we get to spend. I could go on forever with these wonderful peeps. And I love the powerful truth of telling our stories. So really, and Molly, listen, that was Molly saying, I agree. So I hope you join us for more of these interviews. These are going to be on our website, social media, on YouTube. And by the way, if you have the ability to go on YouTube and hit subscribe, that helps a lot, because then YouTube shares it with more people, the more subscribers there is. So we appreciate that. And share it with others that you think, especially please do share this with someone that you think needs to be encouraged as they share their story. Someone like you have a really good story to share. Maybe they're a little shy, but they don't know how to do it. Please do share this with others. Let's bless others with good news. Bad news travels quick. Good news has to be very intentionally shared. So please do share this with others. God bless you. Thank you for being with us, and we will see you next time. Bye.